Hey guys, hope you're doing fantastic. Alex here with the Big Al Show. Welcome to episode number 5 with Jim Allen, the man, the myth, the legend. Thanks so much for tuning in. Jim, how we doing today?
Doing good, man.
Good.
Excited to get to talk to you a little bit.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks for being on. Appreciate you taking some time today. So I want to get to know Jim today. Obviously, we know you do real estate. We'll talk a little bit about that. But who is Jim Allen? If someone said, "Who's Jim?" What would you say to him?
I'm a dad first before I'm anything else. And hopefully people say, and then I'm a Christian. And then I hope they say he's a guy that likes to help other people succeed.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think you definitely live that out. I've been working for you for what, almost 4 months now. So really enjoyed it. Jim really is the hard worker and the good guy that, is shown out there in the marketplace. But tell us a little bit about how you grew up. Grew up in Danville, Virginia.
Actually, I grew up outside of Danville, Virginia, and in Danville. I grew up in a little town called Samora, North Carolina, and that's where our real roots as a family are. And then, but Danville, my parents migrated to just because had a little bit better schools than the area we were in. But my dad had a little convenience store, kind of is what you'd call it then, but really it was the grocery store of our little area. They only had 43 people that grew up in Samora, so they had to have somewhere to eat. But the whole county around us came to buy supplies at my dad's little store, and then my dad had a little barbecue pit restaurant he did next door to it. So he was a little bit entrepreneurial, but didn't really make any money because it wasn't a big audience. He was doing stuff too. So, that's kind of where I grew up. But, I grew up really poor and didn't know it though, because my parents never really said, "Hey, by the way, you're poor."
Right.
But when you get to school, people tell you quick. So I didn't realize till, I got in first grade that maybe I didn't have clothes like other people, and maybe I didn't have the right shoes and all that. But I, got over it and worked harder.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember my mom's told me stories of her growing up in Western North Carolina, and she was like, "Yeah, we showed up to school and we didn't have any shoes, and we realized we were a little bit of the odd ones out." So it's humble beginnings, and it sounds like so your dad was a little bit of a businessman, and I know you've talked before about your mom being a teacher. Talk about that a little bit and the impact it had on
so
you.
Actually, my sister's a teacher. My mom actually ran a women's clothing store back in our hometown, and neither one of my parents ever made more than $20,000 a year in their whole lives, but they both had really strong work ethics. So even as a young kid, we didn't really have people keeping us. We stayed at home alone. My mom went to work, my dad went to work, and we just hung out. My sister was in school because my sister's 5 years older than me. So, as a 4, 5, 6 year old, I was pretty much independent at that age.
No, that's awesome. As far as kind of the difference between your dad and your mom, I guess, did your dad teach you certain life lessons your mom didn't? Were there certain things that kind of taught you growing up that were different from one another?
Yeah, my dad, for whatever reason, when somebody doesn't have something, it's hard to imagine them being this sharing and giving to other people. But the community we grew up in, that little convenience store was the epicenter of everything. And so all the people around us that were farmers bought all their seed, whatever, from my dad. And when my dad passed away, he had this little book, and it had everybody in our community's name in it and who owed him money and who didn't. And I mean, literally, it was the whole city, because if a guy's crop didn't come in, my dad didn't make him pay him, and none of them paid us till the end of their crop season. So, at my dad's funeral, the guys, I figured out really quick, the guys that were the nicest owed my dad the most money. And I kind of just threw the book away, other than just the life lesson that you're supposed to help other people. But my dad was really a serious guy, and he sat down and he talked a lot to me about real life lessons. I remember being 11 years old, and my dad grew up during the Depression. So he told me, he said, you know, son, when I was 11, I asked my dad for $1 and he didn't have it. So I never asked him again. Well, I don't think my dad was telling me never to ask him again, but I didn't know that then. So I never did. So I became like a serial entrepreneur, figuring out how to make money in any direction, doing things. And, you know, one of my earliest things, since my dad owned a little restaurant, I used to sell peanut butter and jelly sandwiches out the back window of our house. My parents bring it in the front, and I'm selling it out the side for a nickel or a dime or whatever I could get. I made literally everybody I knew, I made their lunch, all my little kid friends, just giving it out because I needed money. I figured, you know, that's a way to get it somehow. But my dad also taught me to like be fair and honest. My dad was the most honest guy I've ever met. And like when he passed, that's how people talked about him. You know, he didn't drink. He was just a straight arrow. And my mom, on the other hand, my mom gave me my greatest life lessons. My mom told me, she said, you know, nobody's better than you. You may not have the same things they've got, you may not have the same characteristics they've got, but you put your pants on the same way they do every single day, and nobody's better than you. So when you get down on yourself or you think you can't do something, forget that. You're as good as anybody else. And she breathed that into me, which today is how I even believe today. I think, you know, it only takes one person in life to believe you can do something before you can go do it. And the other thing my mom would tell me, because in my early career, I'm not going to say, hey, I was super successful every day. I failed a lot, but every time I failed, my mom would say, "What are you worried about, son? God takes care of everything you need. But at the same time, if you lose everything you got, what did you lose? You started with absolutely nothing. You can't be afraid."
Yeah.
That belief gave me what I'll call financial courage.
Yeah.
And it made me not afraid to lose, and, you know, not afraid to put myself out there. And I think, you know, majority of people I meet, the reason they don't succeed is they never try.
Mm.
They just, oh, okay, I'm going to fail, so I'm not even going to do it. I never worried about it. I thought, you know what, if I don't succeed this time, I'll succeed the next time.
Mm-hmm.
And if I fail, what's the big deal? The happiest I ever was in my entire life. I grew up, when we moved to Danville finally, we rented this little 680 square foot, 1 bedroom house. And my sister and I had to share a bed in my parents' bedroom. So we were all pretty daggone close. And we had a little den and a little kitchen in this long hallway, or I thought it was long. It was probably 6 or 7 feet, but we would run from one end to the other when we were little kids, sliding back and forth, thinking how cool we were. But that's the happiest I ever was. So, you know, you don't need the trappings of success for happiness. So,
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think for me, it's last couple of years I've tried to figure out, you know, your identity is not your work necessarily. It's not, you know, what you accomplish, but it's, you know, who you are. And there's always going to be someone that's better than you. And I love the advice that everyone puts their pants on the same. Michael Turbert, when I was on his podcast, he asked me best advice I ever gotten, and that was from Michael Overton, my first boss ever in Greenville. And I believe it. I mean, obviously, if you sit in a room with folks like you, if you don't have that mentality, then you're going to be a nervous wreck and probably feel like you don't belong. So, no, that's awesome. And I know you played a little baseball growing up, right?
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about kind of what sports you played, why you stuck to baseball.
Listen, I played everything, and I played everything because as a child, you know, we would work in the backfield. When we got through, everybody who had been working, you know, instead of just going home and resting, we played a little bit. We would play donkey baseball sometimes. We had a little donkey, and you had to jump on it to run to first base. Or, you know, we just get together as a group, and baseball at that point was like the really the sport that everybody played. My mom, as a little kid, I grew up, my mom was the first pitcher I ever faced because she would pitch to all the kids in the neighborhood. She played college basketball and was a really
Oh,
good
wow.
athlete. And so, anyway, she would pitch to us and we learned to hit. I learned to hit as a young kid with a little tobacco stick. My dad gave me a tobacco stick and told me to throw up rocks in the yard. And if I could hit that, I could hit anything. And it's the truth. And I probably need to go buy my kids a tobacco
Yeah.
stick now. But like as a young kid, I literally, whatever season it was, that's the sport I played because I didn't know any different. And, you know, sports, my parents believe, kept you out of trouble,
Right.
and they did. So I literally, even in high school, I played every single sport, and just whatever season. But I loved baseball because as a young kid, baseball card collecting was a big deal to
Yeah.
me as a child. I did this first term paper I ever did on how much return baseball cards give. And, I was able to buy for 10 cents a pack of 10. So, man, I had 1 cent invested in each one. And the average baseball card at that time, according to this magazine I'm reading, was about 11 cents. So I was making like 1,000% return on my money. And I'm thinking, man, this is a great way to make money. And in fact, I've still got my baseball card collection and I've got it insured for a little over $2 million
Wow.
because as a kid, I kept all these things, traded with other kids in my neighborhood, knew who the rookie cards were. I kind of figured that out at a young age, but I would sit around because, TV was not a big deal when I was a
Right.
kid. We had 3 channels. And I remember when I was 13, our town got Cablevision for the first time. So ESPN's first year, and it was table tennis, or they didn't have any real sports on there, but they talked a lot, and it stayed on 24/7. That was the first thing ever. But I didn't really watch it. I sat around and played for hours with these baseball cards, putting them in the right order, figuring out, had them all stripped out by teams and kind of followed those guys. And they were like, kind of the hero worship. And, I was a really good hitter for whatever reason. And, I've got a friend of mine named Terry Short that I played a lot of baseball with when I was a kid. And he and I have been reminiscing recently through Facebook because that's one of the cool things about social media now is you're able to contact these people from another generation. And, my boys play baseball, and Terry will tell me that, one of my kids' swings looks like mine, or there's elements that he sees. And, mine kind of were the same way, mimicking my dad growing up. My sister's name is Johnny, which is unusual for a girl, but my Uncle Johnny, who was a professional baseball player, um, committed suicide because his baseball team didn't renew his contract.
Wow.
And, unfortunately, a couple of weeks after he did this, they get a telegram in the mail where they were getting ready to renew his contract. And, baseball was so the center of everything he did. He threw away his life on it. My dad, because of that, even though baseball was such a big part of my life, really wasn't involved in my baseball life other than helping me with this tobacco stick. He didn't go to my games, didn't do that part because I think his brother dying had really impacted him in that way. And so one of the things I make sure of with my own kids is that they know if you strike out, if you make a mistake, whatever it is, the world didn't just end. It can't all begin and stop with baseball. But, I credit baseball for a lot of my hard work and a lot of things I did on my own. Now kids can only play if you got, the right number and then the right positions. But when we were children, we would have 2 or 3 of us, and whatever field you hit to that someone wasn't in, it was an automatic out. So, I got used to hitting to what field.
Yeah.
And, so baseball was a big deal and still is. My kids and I have been to World Series together, and, you know, that's an important element that I can share with
Yeah.
them.
No, that's awesome. And it sounds like, so with your trading cards, it sounds like you kind of did that. That is kind of what you do with real estate today. So it's funny how things correlate. And
Well, it's everything that way.
Yeah.
So when we were young, my sister got a $5 a week allowance for doing chores around the house and whatever it was. I got the same thing, but I had a whole lot longer list of stuff I had to do to get that $5. I was out priming tobacco in the field and doing work that, you know, was really working hard for that little bit. I didn't spend any of it. My sister, the day she got hers, would go out and spend it. I saved it and collected it and figured, you know, there are things I want to do in my life. I just never found the things I wanted to spend it on. So
Yeah.
I was a saver from like way back.
That's good. I mean, I learned some lessons from you probably in that part of life, you know, even today for myself. But so that's awesome. And so you went to NC State. I know you studied engineering there. What do you think you've always had kind of an engineer's mind? What made you, I guess, want to be an engineer to start?
My parents, you know, I tore things apart as a kid and kind of try to put them back together and fix. It really wasn't that I tore them apart. It's when stuff broke around us, I had to figure out how do I get it back together. So I was curious. My parents always told me, you know, engineers build bridges and do all these cool things. And so, you know, I had a pretty good aptitude for math. So I thought, well, that's a good thing for me to do. Not realizing it really wasn't my interest, you know, it really wasn't the thing that drove me, although I was a pleaser. I wanted to make my parents proud. You know, I would love to say, oh, I was a rebellious youth, never wanted to please. I wasn't. I absolutely wanted to do everything to make my parents proud of me, however I had to, and constantly did. And you know that was important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm similar. I think you know, I have a brother. He's done great, but you know, feel like at times a lot of weight on my shoulders to be successful. And I know my parents are proud of me, but there's times you just hope you hear that from them and how important it is for them to say it, which my parents do all the time, and they're amazing. But as far as, all right, so going to NC State, what did you first think about Raleigh when you landed here?
Oh man, biggest town I'd ever seen, and compared to now, it was like out nowhere land. But I'd never left home. I'd
Right.
never been in a big city or around people, and you know, even coming down here, I had to work just to be able to pay my way through school too. So I went to work at a little store called Ronson's in North Hills Mall. And North Hills Mall at that time from NC State, because you know the outer loop didn't exist. The road system that we have now wasn't there. It was like a 40-minute drive to
Yeah.
get back to state to, you know, commute every day to go to this job I had. And I'd never even been to Raleigh before.
Wow.
Like the day I showed up on campus was the first time I'd ever even been to Raleigh. And that next day I had to go to work. I had to be there. So I had to figure it out. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm glad I got dropped off. But I tell you, for my kids, I've been talking to them about, you know, State was even then a big school. It's like 29,000 people. It's in the 40s now. And shoot, I'd never been around that kind of people before. And, you know, being a little country boy and not really having done it, I was just like a bumpkin dropped off in the middle of nowhere and didn't know anything and kind of had to figure it out.
I remember my mom, again, going back to when I was talking about her growing up going to school. I remember when she said she went to State and joined her sorority, she was like, gosh, I was probably the biggest redneck there. And I thought I was as normal as could be. So,
and all my friends, like, so when I did join a fraternity too, same thing, they were all rich.
Yeah.
I had no idea where they got this money just grew on trees that these guys had. Well, I worked the whole time. And it looked like I was just like them, but it's because I was making $37,000 a year selling women's shoes while I was in college, trying to figure out how to look normal.
Yeah. Did you ever envy those folks, or even today, do you envy folks that come from money? Or, I mean, my thought is, hey, that they're born into it. It's not like they can help
Not
it,
really,
you know?
because I feel like, that's a disadvantage,
Mhm.
because if you don't have to work for what you get in your life, then you don't appreciate it the same way. And, I was really never jealous of anybody. I kind of always felt like, you know, God puts the path in front of each person they deserve, and whatever they get, they just had it.
Yeah.
You know, jealousy is a bad thing, and I've tried to stray from that.
No, I love that. And so, getting to your love life a little bit, when did you meet your wife? How did you guys meet? Tell me a little bit about that.
So, and it's funny, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, but I'll tell you, like, I've had strong women every step of my life, my
Mhm.
whole life. And, my girlfriend in college is the only reason I even started selling real estate.
Wow.
She graduated ahead of me, and she was like an apartment manager. And they told her if she didn't get a real estate license, she couldn't go to the next level.
Wow.
And she was having a struggle doing it. So she told me if I would take it with her, she would pay for my class. So I owe that girl right now, and I won't say names, but I do owe that girl getting me into real estate.
Yeah.
Because while I was in college, I went ahead and got my license, figuring I just learned how to buy stuff for myself, and
Mhm.
that's where we'll go. But after that, my wife actually was a school teacher too. My sister was a teacher, my wife was a teacher, but didn't know that when I met her. I was working for a little small company here in town called Powell and Company, and I walked in that day, and I noticed there was somebody new sitting at the front desk. Didn't even think about it, just kind of walked by. Before I got to my office, Tom Powell came up, who was my boss, and said, "You cannot ask that girl out." And, for me, anything in my life somebody else told me I couldn't do was an automatic invitation. I had to go do it. So
Yeah.
I started making Amy type everything I could think of. And, just, and then finally, out of the blue, she asked me out.
Oh, there we
She
go.
said, if you stop making me type stuff, I'll go out with you. That's how we went out the first time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so, so you got into real. I guess how many you went to NC State? Did you do any other jobs before you started
Just
work?
engineering.
Got it.
So I worked for a company called Apex right out of college, which had been Thompson Arthur previously, and a guy named John Thompson, who a bunch of buildings are named for at NC State. He and his brother Robert started that company, and I was doing soil cement down on Ocracoke Island, trying to figure out how to keep the sides of the road from eroding. And I was in charge of a big crew of kids, and I call them kids. They were in their 40s. I was 21, 22 years old, and they certainly didn't want to listen to me. And I was a guy in college, but we'd go in every morning at 4:30 in the morning, get all the equipment up and running, and then we would work till dark.
Yeah.
And we'd all go back. We stayed in this little hotel in Buxton, and we would all go back to our hotel, get ready, go to dinner, and then they'd go out and drink all night. They get in at 1:30, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. We're getting up at 4:30. I had a key to every person's hotel room, and whoever didn't show up, I'd go unlock it, have to pour them in a shower, pour buckets of water in their bed, whatever to get rid of them. Well, I did that for about 6 months. I got mono, the worst case you can get, because I was just running on fumes and got sick. Well, I came home trying to kind of get well for a week or two. And while I did, I thought, I'm going to go out and apply to all these places. So I didn't even know you got paid on commission in real estate. I went and interviewed at like everywhere. First place I went was Century 21, and they told me I had to wear this gold jacket. I didn't look good in gold, so I didn't do that. But I went literally to every office. They all offered me a job. I thought, man, I must be incredible.
Yeah.
And I showed up that first day at work at Powell and Company, having no idea I was there on commission. I hadn't asked them how I was going to get paid, but I knew I didn't want to work for this road crew anymore. Right. And so I showed up, and this guy met me, and I won't use his name. His first name I'll say. His name is Bert. This guy named Bert met me who was on phone duty that day in the office. And, I walk in, he says, "Hey, I'm Bert. I'm going to get some donuts." And he left. I'm the only person in the office. The phone starts ringing, and it was a pretty complicated switchboard, and I had no idea how to use it. So I hung up on the first 3 or 4 people that called in. I finally figured out how to say hello. And this lady, my first day in real estate, this lady said, her name was Sarah Polk. Lady says, "Hey, I want to see this house." And she gave me an address, not knowing any better. And cell phones didn't exist at this point,
Yeah.
by the way. I took off with a map in my car to where she was, got there, and realized I don't know how to get in this house.
Yeah.
And so I drove back up to the corner, used a payphone. Thank God I had enough change. Used a payphone, called back my office, and thank God Tess Witt, who was one of the girls who hired me, had given me her card. So I called Tess. I said, "Hey Tess, what do I do? These people, I want to show them this house, but it's got this lockbox thing on the front door, and I don't have a key." And back then you had to have a key.
Yeah.
She said, "Well, you can't. You're not officially an agent yet." So I'll confess this now. My very first sale, I broke into the house that I sold, took my credit card back. I had one that had a $500 balance on it. I broke it all to pieces trying to unlock the door, but I got it unlocked. Took her in. They wanted to buy it. So I didn't have a clue how to write a contract. Drove straight back to the office, not knowing that it was supposed to be hard to sell something.
Yeah.
Took me all day. But by the way, it was the house next door that was for sale. This was a model I went to that I broke into. So I wrote the wrong contract on the wrong house, but the one next door was for sale. That guy ended up taking me to arbitration because I had not shown the property.
Oh gosh.
Thank goodness I won and got the commission, but it was a $34,000 townhome.
Mm-hmm.
Or kind of townhome that I ended up selling that first one. But that afternoon when I got back to the office, that same guy, Bert, said, "Man, I hope you got a lot of money saved because it'll be, a year before you have any money." And of course, I had this much saved. I just attacked real estate like I did working on the farm. Like you just get up and you work every day. And I literally have never been a week without selling a house.
Wow.
In
awesome.
40 years of selling real estate.
And so you worked for, was it Tom Powell? Was that
Tom
right?
Powell.
And I guess, is he around it?
He passed away a few years ago, but like he was one of my first mentors because my dad died early in my life. My dad had passed away not too long before I started with Powell and Company, and my dad never really got to see me do anything in my life because he passed away of cancer at a young age. But it made me responsible even more not having that part of the backup, even though it was not a financial backup.
Right.
Just somebody that was tougher than you back there
in your corner.
And so when I met Tom, and I don't know that Tom wanted to fill the role of surrogate dad, but he kind of had to because I didn't have one.
Yeah.
So, I kind of turned him in. He actually ended up being the best man at my wedding. And, years later, when my mom got sick with Alzheimer's, I bought a house straight across the street from Tom's, and mine was down the street. And he kind of helped me look after her for a while too.
What was the biggest lesson Tom taught you, I guess, in those years?
The biggest thing Tom taught me is everything's about what I'm put in effort wise. There is no giving. In our company, we didn't even have listings. I mean, our boss controlled all the listings. It wasn't a sharing process. All the new home neighborhoods, everything else were just all his. We got to sit in the open houses to try and get business on our own. But I think what Tom taught me more than anything is that I got to be responsible for myself. No one else is going to drive me to the office. Nobody else is going to make me have to work. But one of the things he did do that was kind of like a dad, when he saw that I wasn't doing what I'm supposed to do, he, rather than being kind about it, he would say, "Okay, Alan, if you do not show up for your open houses on time, if you don't put enough signage out, you will not work here." And, the threat of losing something, I just hadn't lost a lot of things in my life. A lot of people died in my life, but I didn't let things go because I always had this fear of loss, my whole life. So I've always, if somebody told me they were going to take something away from me, I'd work 10 times harder to keep it.
Wow. Yeah. And I have a good follow-up question on that. I mean, obviously now today you have 70 agents, about almost probably 100 people that work in this office here in Raleigh. You've obviously built something amazing, and in my opinion, I think there's kind of the two mountains of success. You get the success, and obviously you have to keep that up, but you want to get better too. So have you had more motivation from, folks maybe taking away some of your success, or, getting weaker as a team, or what motivates you is to keep growing and, keep pushing forward?
What pushes me the same way today that always has, real estate is about numbers and accomplishment, and that's kind of what it is. And, in my early real estate career, I was fortunate in that we not a lot of attention was paid to those numbers working under Tom. And when Tom decided he's ready to retire, rather than one of us taking over his business or doing something different, he just moved to Prudential and just hung his license there part-time. Well, I didn't know what else to do, so I followed him.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of years later, Robert Helms was the owner of our company then. And Robert and I went to this first national convention for Prudential, and I never felt smaller or less significant in my whole life, because when we first got there, I saw all these people walking around with these blue ribbons on, and there weren't a lot of them. There were only 10 of them, and those were the pinnacle. And those 10 guys and females were the absolute top 10 of that company. And, and then that first day of the convention, they called the first, 100 agents in the network, and there were probably 90,000 or something in the Prudential network, but for top 100 all walked across the stage. Well, I wasn't in the top 1,000. So, and none of them looked any different than me.
Right.
And it really kind of sunk in, and I felt like a complete failure. I felt like, what, I haven't done anything. I thought being the top agent in my little office meant I was something, but I really hadn't done anything yet. So a friend of mine named Nancy Harner, who her husband Jim works here with us now at JAG. But a friend of mine, Nancy Harner, and I were talking out in the audience, and she could tell I was kind of down. So she pulled me over to Robert Helms, our owner, and I asked Robert, I said, Robert, what do I got to do? What's the number, the number 10 guy on this list on GCI and units? What did they do last year? And he looked at me and he laughed at me and he said, Jim, they're all from California and all these other, nobody from Raleigh, North Carolina could ever do this. Don't even be that silly, and laughed. I mean, I don't think he was laughing at me, but that's how I took it.
Right.
And the one thing I've learned in my life is don't tell me I can't do something, because I'm going to prove you wrong somehow. I came back from that convention like on fire. Nancy, thank goodness, being the good friend she is, got me the numbers of those top 10 agents in both categories. And there was a girl in Greensboro that was already like number 9 or 10. So somebody from North Carolina was in this list, right? And so anyway, I got that bottom number and I glued it on my mirror in my bathroom on both categories. And I looked at it every day. And being the engineering and problem solver I am, I figured out, okay, here's how many sales I've got to make per week, per day to get my numbers to get where I need to get. And all that meant was, okay, I got to take every single person's duty. I've got to do every open house I can, even if it means I got to do 2 in a day. I got to do it. Well, I did that, and I held myself accountable to those two goals for that entire year, still not having any idea that maybe they grew that year or maybe something different would
Right.
change. But and back then, even when you went to the convention, you still didn't know that you were in these categories. So, I worked all the way the last day of the year. I mean, I remember working, that last day all the way up to 11 o'clock, right before New Year's Eve, just trying to stack up these numbers. And remember, I hadn't even been in the top 100 the year before. So that February, I went to that convention. And when I first got there and I checked in, they handed me two of these blue ribbons.
Ooh.
And so I made the pinnacle in both things. Didn't know where I was in ranking in it.
Yeah.
But I remember that night thinking, I've done everything I could ever do. I called my mom, my sister, and my little brother. And I said, look, it was in New Orleans too, by the way. I said, I don't care what it costs. I'm paying for y'all to come. Of course, I didn't have any money at the time, none. So the three of them got in the car, drove over. All I could do was pay for their hotel, which I did. So they were out in the audience for that first thing. And it was so cool how they did it. They had 11 of us in each category lined up in the back. I'm like, wow, there's only 10. So I didn't know why the 11th person was there. And I'm like, oh man, I hope I'm not 11th and I don't even get to be on the stage. And as sad as this sounds, that 11th person, they invited out first and told them just barely missed in both categories. I mean, can you imagine how hard that would have hurt?
Yeah.
But then the rest of us stood behind these big circles. We had no idea what the number was on our circle, but yours would light up and you had to punch through when it was over. So that first year, I was number 6 and I was number 8. It was number 6 in units and number 8 in GCI in the country. And man, I still, felt like I'd done everything until I met the guy that was number 1 and the girl who was number 1 in the other category. And the girl who was number 1 had this huge team, like, at the time had like 40 people working for her and whatever. And I didn't sit there and say, well, she's got an advantage on me because she's got more. I thought, well, if I'm going to get to be number 1, I just got to work harder.
Right.
So the next year when I came back, I'd gotten to number 2 in both categories by myself, just literally was working so hard. I got this thing called alopecia where I had like hair falling out, little circles on the sides of my head because I was stressing so bad to get where I wanted to get. And, it took me 3 years to get to be number 1 in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you that first time, I still remember what it felt like today. But what I also remember is the minute after I walked off that stage, other than the people in that audience that walked up to me, when I got back to Raleigh, not one person cared that I had just won this thing that I'd been working for my whole life, thinking it's the most important thing in the world.
Right.
And it put it into perspective. Listen, you chase things and you think they're the most important, most significant thing in the world. And they're really kind of not sometimes. But I will tell you, having goals, attacking goals made me more successful, like made me sell more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Success is a totally different thing than making a lot of money and all these other things. When you start becoming, in my definition of success, when you start becoming successful is when you're able to help a lot of people around you and you get to see them start feeling what they think is success. That's what's different. But God's been really good to me, and every step of my life, every time I thought I was flying too high, he's pulled me back down to earth and let me know how insignificant I was in the big picture of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess I was going to ask you what kind of wakes you up every day, but I think it's kind of giving back to the team, the community, folks you can help, stuff like that.
It is because my mom, even though she never, like I told you, never made more than $20,000 a year, she had 8 brothers and sisters. One died when she was a little girl, but my mom was the second oldest. But she became responsible for all her brothers and sisters, and she made sure if they wanted to go to school, whatever it was, she paid for it. She worked for it. She paid for all their weddings. When their kids were born, my mom put some of their kids through college. She paid for all of their weddings. I don't know how or where or what box she pulled it out of, but she just did because she would sacrifice so much for everybody else. So she was really the matriarch of our family. And, when she got Alzheimer's, that torch got passed to me. And I've never been more grateful for anything in my life, because being responsible for other people and and that's what drives me still right now. I mean, the reason I'll probably never retire or never quit or never want to slow down is, how do I tell somebody on my team that we aren't the best team anymore? How do I, oh, well, you should have been here when?
Right.
It's still pushing me and driving me right to this second, not for me, but for them, because they haven't experienced it yet. And, for me, like, unfortunately and fortunately, I wasn't able to have kids in my life at a young age. I didn't have my first child until I was 45.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I had already been married 11 years and had kind of given up. And out of the blue, just like every other lesson God teaches me, we got pregnant with Edwin. And, that moment that he was born, I realized I love other things more than I love myself. And then, I was so worried 2 years later when we got pregnant again. I was like, I was 47 by then. I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to love Atkins, my second child, as much in as many ways. And the minute he was born, I fell completely in love with him, differently, but just as much and more in some ways, because he wasn't breathing when he first came out. He was kind of purple, and the doctors kind of rushed him away. Man, they didn't take him away from me, because I went right in where they were going with him, because I was not going to let him down. And it's like that love right there is why I have a faith in God,
Mm-hmm.
because realizing that the God I worship gave his only child up so that I could survive. And if you ask me today, and by the way, my kids aren't mine, they're God's. But if you said, hey, Jim, you're going to have to give one of your child or children up so that someone else, no way, take me, but not them. So to know that God could do that for me is like, man,
Yeah.
like, what else can you ask? So life is pretty simple and basic now. While everybody thinks we're high flying and doing, no, you know what? We're pretty simple people. And I don't really spend a lot of money, and I don't get involved in the trappings of money, because money is just like those baseball cards. It's something you can collect and put over here on this shelf and help other people with as much as you can.
Right.
But it doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you different. It doesn't make you so you can jump out of a building. It doesn't change you if you keep yourself planted.
Mm-hmm. You'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. That's
right.
What I always hear. So,
and it's the truth.
I know we got about 10 more minutes. Okay with you?
Yeah.
So I guess getting into your faith, I guess when did you become a Christian? I guess how has that changed you? Why Christianity over other religions? I guess tell me a little bit about your walk in that.
So I said I became a Christian when I was 10, because I went to this revival and this guy was, really singing those songs and doing the things. And I felt it. I don't know if I ever, I never had prayed in front of other people before, and certainly never got on my knees on an altar before. but I did that day. And I thought I was a Christian then, but I believed, but I wasn't doing anything about it. I wasn't serving God in any way, shape, or form. And I was blessed though, because right before my oldest child was born, and this is at 45 years old, a friend of mine named Phil Miller came up to me and invited me to go to Bible Study Fellowship. And BSF is what the initials are, but they're all, BSF is all around the world. But I didn't go for the right reason. I went because I wanted to do business with Phil. Well, after about 2 weeks there, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do business with him because it'll take away from why I'm here. And the Lord knew that I needed to get in his word more to be a parent. And thank goodness he brought me there. And I will tell you that I think that every man should go to Bible Study Fellowship, because we need it more than others do, because we get so trapped up in being tough sometimes. And I will tell you, when you sink back into God's word and you realize how real it is and how it's every single day, it's hard to adjust any other way. So what I'm aware of is that nothing is mine anymore. Everything is really God's. And when I get buried, I'm not going to put a pile of money in my coffin. I'm not going to put all the, my baseball cards or anything else I've collected. It's not going in there with me. People's hearts and feelings and hopefully the emotions are what I'm going to take with me, but I'm certainly not going to take that. So that's why Christianity has served me well. And I think it would everybody. And, I'm a pure faith guy, and I can't tell you why not anything else other than I just know God loved me enough to give me a second chance and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. And, I'm trying my best now not to let him down, although I know I do every day.
Right. Absolutely. We all do. So just try to be the best you can be. All right. So we're going to get to the 3 big questions. These are what I ask everybody. You've touched a little bit on some of these, but number 1, best advice you've ever received and from whom?
My mom. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to give her my mom telling me I was just as good as everybody else and believing in me, number 1. But number 2, there was a youth pastor of mine named David Gilbreth. And when I was struggling in college and after college, feeling like a failure, not wanting to be an engineer and going to transition into real estate, I met with David, and David had been a big, tough Marine in his life. And so when we met, I was expecting the big Marine talk. And, but I always felt like a longing that I wasn't serving God well enough. And I told him, do you think I should be a pastor? I mean, maybe I missed what I'm supposed to do. And he said, no, let me tell you something. Biggest mistake I ever made was becoming a preacher, because if I had stayed a Marine, I could have witnessed to so many more people so easily, because now when I walk in, I'm carrying this moniker that I'm a pastor, and a lot of doors get slammed and a lot of people won't listen to my message because they think I'm perfect or they think I'm this thing I'm not. He said, if I'd have stayed a Marine, I think I could have served God much more. He said, what I would tell you is every day, everybody that's around you, you get to be a witness for those people. And nobody's ever going to find Christ because of you. They might not find him because of you, but you reach out the branch every time you can, and that'll be your reward. And quite honestly, he was right. Every one of us, in whatever occupation we're in, are really just messengers of God. I mean, in the Bible, Jesus was a carpenter. I mean, he's the greatest pastor that ever lived, could speak to 5,000 like it was nothing, but he was really a carpenter first. And he was a hard-working carpenter that put it together. So hard work never hurts. In the Bible, it says, work 6 days and rest one. There's no retirement plan in the Bible.
Yeah.
If you can find it, you show it to me. But all these people are working their whole lives so they can retire. So I don't think that's what God wants us to do. I think God wants us to work our whole lives. Now, when we get older, hopefully we're working smarter.
Yeah.
Because, my dad, who died young, died much younger than I am now. And, before he died, he gave me some of these steps and some of these life lessons where, he would just say, son, everything that you get in your life that you work for, you're going to appreciate more than the things I give you. And, he was right.
Yeah. No, I love that. And talking about your funeral, one day, whenever that happens, what the person that gives that eulogy, what would you hope that they say about Jim?
Ooh, man, that's a hard question. So I guess
Told you they're gonna get deep.
I think what I would really hope is that the people there would say, he did right by me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was a good guy, and he cared about his family, and his kids were paramount in his life. And man, what a solid Christian.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. And the last question, kind of tied to that one, but if you had to be remembered by one word or phrase, everything Jim Allen did was deleted. All the words you've written have been deleted. You just have one word or one phrase on how you could be remembered. What would you say that would be?
Caring.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Love that. Well, thank you, sir, for coming on the Big Al Show. Tune in for future episodes. I'm going to get a little bit better at trying to do these a little bit more consistently. Obviously, if you guys need a house, give us a call here at the Jim Allen Group. And until next time, hope you guys have a great summer, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you, sir.